It's really important to remember that this is an adversarial system. You are up against trained and experienced criminal lawyers who do nothing in their professional lives other than to prosecute criminal cases.
For most of us, facing court with no lawyer and no legal advice in a case that could change the course of your life would be unthinkable.
The stakes are incredibly high, particularly with the government pursuing a tough-on-crime agenda. It's never been easier to end up in a Territory jail.
But that's the situation facing dozens of defendants in the Northern Territory. Many of them disadvantaged, many of them with English as their second or third language, some just children, all being forced to go it alone in a legal system most adults would struggle to navigate.
It's one thing to be tough on crime, but if you're going to be tough, you have to be fair.
Lawyer Clancy Dane says a shortage of legal aid, exacerbated by the Territorian government's tough on crime agenda, is leaving vulnerable people without the right to a fair trial. Now he's fighting to change that. I'm Daniel James, and you're listening to 7am. Today, Territory Criminal Lawyers Principal Clancy Dane on what he says is the worst legal aid crisis this country has ever seen. It's Wednesday, May 27. Clancy, can you start by telling me about the shortage of legal aid in the Northern Territory right now and the changes that have meant that dozens of people don't have access to a lawyer?
So in November of last year, legal aid in the Northern Territory announced that, subject to a few exceptions, no legal aid would be available for people who are not in prison. The core reason for that, according to a letter from the Northern Territory Legal Aid Director, which was leaked to the media, is that $3.3 million was cut from legal aid this year, which represents a bit over 20% of their budget.
Because we know if we can make police's job better, if we can build more prison beds, have a better justice system, we are going to be able to deliver a safer Territory.
That comes at a time where the criminal justice system in the Northern Territory is in overdrive because of that same government's tough on crime policies.
So we have done an incredible feat where we have increased the prison population exponentially because people who commit crimes are now facing consequences for their actions. The courts are
So if you are accused of a crime now and you're lucky enough under our new bail laws to keep your liberty and you can't afford to pay for a lawyer, there is every chance you will now have to represent yourself. There's a sad irony there that the people who get bail and can stay out of custody tend to be the same people who don't have much, if any, criminal history.
And nothing will stop us delivering on our commitments to reduce crime, rebuild the economy and restore our beautiful lifestyle.
The NT government says this isn't about funding cuts. What are they saying about this? Does it stack up with what you're seeing? What's their defence?
Well, it's an incredible situation and disturbing for me to watch where, as far as I've seen, the Attorney-General has just flat out denied that there have been legal aid cuts.
You say that you're standing up for Aboriginal Territorians, but there is a portion of the community, namely Indigenous Territorians, who feel alienated and targeted by a number of the reforms that your government has been putting in place. Do you recognise that rift?
Our laws apply to everybody equally. And it's certainly not racist to want a safer community, and I stand by that.
She talks about an increase to baseline funding for legal aid, but the baseline funding wasn't the whole picture. So we've got an Attorney-General who is just denying what is really the lived reality of people on the ground, and a letter from the Legal Aid Director that says that they have experienced a funding cut.
And what about the scale of the problem? How many people are we talking about here? And how serious are some of the charges that these people are facing without a lawyer?
The truth is that I don't know, and I don't know if anybody knows how many people are slipping through these cracks in the system. I haven't seen any official figures released. There are 3 special lists currently scheduled for June in Alice Springs, Katherine and Darwin, where all of these people are being adjourned into for those regional or urban centres. But outside of those areas, there's a lot of Northern Territory. We have dozens and dozens of circuit courts, mostly in remote Aboriginal communities. where there are growing numbers of people who are being expected to represent themselves. These are largely traditional Aboriginal people who often don't speak English as their first, second or third language. And that's the other thing about these cuts. They apply whether or not you speak English. They apply if you can't read or write. They apply if you're a child accused of a crime. They apply if you have a cognitive disability or mental illness or any other disability, which makes it hard to represent. So there is a really profound unfairness to them.
So people are navigating the court system without a lawyer. What does that look like in reality, and how much of a disadvantage does that present to people brought before the courts?
So let's put aside all of those potential disabilities or other vulnerabilities that people might have. Let's say you're an educated, English-speaking adult with every advantage in life. Are you going to know what a voir dire is? Do you know what a bachelor inquiry is? Are you familiar with the local court Criminal Procedure Act and understand what your disclosure obligations are to the prosecution or to pursue your rights as committal? I'm not talking about complex things. I'm talking about bread and butter for pre-trial process. There's a reason why people do this for a living. I personally have been specialising in criminal law for 13 years. I still learn things every day. The decisions you make from day one affect the outcome of your case. Territorians are, in fact, some of the most incarcerated people on the planet. Our prisons are in a terrible state of overcrowding. So there are good reasons why people with money pay for lawyers, and it is a very sad state of affairs that protection is only offered to the rich.
And you say that the most vulnerable are caught up in this, and that's children. Can you give us an example of some of the cases of children that are left to go it alone in the court system?
Let's say a few kids in my hometown of Katherine are hungry. There's no food in the fridge, and their FASD riddled brains make a poor decision to get some food by shoplifting from a local service station. On the way out, a worker tries to stop them. One of the kids throws some lollies at that shop worker before they run away, and those kids will probably be charged with aggravated robbery because one of them threw the lollies. Aggravated robbery in the Northern Territory carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. That means that instead of dealing with these kids in the kids' court, the case will go to the Supreme Court and follow the same procedure as would apply to an adult. If that kid doesn't have much history, he might get bail and therefore be ineligible for legal aid. When kids are getting in trouble in towns, they're often bailed to remote communities to get them away from antisocial peer networks and under the supervision of cultural leaders. That community might be on an island off the coast of Arnhem Land or in the Gulf of Carpentaria. It might be in the Tanamite Desert or in the Never Never. Now, that child in their first appearance in the Supreme Court is expected to appear before the court in Darwin or Alice Springs, the only places the Supreme Court sits, to apply for bail on their first mention in that court, and then appear somehow for every appearance thereafter. If they had a lawyer, they could be excused for most things, except for the main event. And I'd like to ask the Attorney General how that child is expected to get a fair go. What we will see, instead of kids being bailed to return to homelands, is more kids being bailed in less ideal conditions in town, reoffending, breaching bail, kids being remanded in custody. And what we know from remanding people with hardened criminals is that it tends to normalise criminal behaviours in their minds. It fosters antisocial peer networks, and people come out worse.
I mean, that's from the, alleged perpetrator perspective. What about from the perspective of victims and their families and for the justice system? What are the flow-on effects there?
Well, there's an old adage in the criminal justice system, which is that justice delayed is justice denied. And that applies just as much to victims, their families and the community as it does to the accused. What happens when people self-represent is that cases get bogged down or grind to a halt. And despite what you might see in the movies, actually it's lawyers who often advise people that they should plead guilty. So when people aren't represented, more charges will be contested. There's a risk that the victim ends up cross-examined by the perpetrator in that scenario. But more broadly, the cost to the courts and the prosecutors and the police and corrections as cases drag on is going to be massive. So what we'll have is victims, their families and the community waiting longer for an outcome which may never come, or at best holds an asterisk because the person was unrepresented.
Coming up, the fight to fix the system. Clancy, you're fighting this in court, arguing that at least for the more serious or more complex cases, proceedings should be put on hold until people can get legal representation. How are you arguing that case?
We're trying to get something corrected that we believe was wrongly decided back in 2006. So in 1992, the High Court of Australia said that while you do not have the right to legal representation, you do have the right not to be tried unfairly. And in serious cases, it will be unfair to proceed against the person who does not have a lawyer. Now, in 2006, in the Northern Territory Court of Criminal Appeal, they said that it doesn't apply in the local court. And so we're trying to go back to that court and re-argue that it should be changed and it should be reflected that you have a right not to be tried unfairly in the local court too. And if you don't have a lawyer, those cases should be stayed.
What would it mean if those cases were put on hold, though, Clancy? Would that cause massive delays for courts and for victims?
Absolutely. It's an entirely unsatisfactory outcome. But that's where our government policy has put us, or put the courts. It's having to choose between the lesser of two evils. Do we prosecute a person knowing that it is unfair and knowing that doing so would undermine the integrity of the legal system itself? Or do we press pause on that case until that unfairness can be ameliorated? Neither one is a good choice.
There may be some people listening to this who don't have a lot of sympathy for the accused, thinking that they're criminals and they deserve what they get. What do you say to those people?
Well, I think there's two things to unpack there. First of all, those earlier points about this not just affecting accused people, this affects everyone adversely. And it's also sadder to hear it from so many of my clients who come before the criminal justice system. And I hear it almost every day. Somebody say to me, I never thought this would be me. People don't care about fairness in the criminal justice system until it affects them or their family. But people don't realise that all it takes is a moment of inattention on the road where you cause a serious accident, or someone misinterpreting your actions. Let's say you run in to break up a fight and a bystander across the street says that they thought you were running to join it. I mean, all it takes is for one person who might be mistaken or irrational to accuse you of anything. And all of a sudden you're before the criminal courts.
What happens if you don't win this case?
If we don't win this case, then there will be people in the local court who suffer a spectrum of disadvantages, who are having to self-represent, and all of those negative outcomes flow from there. So it'll be a really, really hard place to be as someone who's given their life, professional life, to the criminal justice system, but it'll be much, much harder for the people who are before the courts themselves.
And finally, Clancy, how would you characterise the health of the justice system in the Northern Territory right now?
I've heard people say it's falling off a cliff. I think it's marching into a bog. It's just becoming less and less efficient, and this is potentially the straw that breaks the camel's back. Crime is such an important issue in the Northern Territory. It dominates elections. It's something that is a real problem up here. The crime statistics are terrible. But gutting legal aid is not the solution to this. How do we fix this? We have to refund legal aid. That's the first thing. But we need to address the crime issues in a constructive way. We could debate the efficacy of tough on crime for hours, but I'll say this, there's a lot of people who walk around calling themselves tough, and some of those people genuinely are tough. Other people just act that way because they don't actually have answers or know how to deal with difficult situations. And the proof will be in the pudding for this government as to which one they are. But really being tough and really dealing with a tough problem takes nuance, and it takes understanding, and it takes hard choices being made and sacrifices that I don't think are being made right now. And that's probably a much bigger conversation.
Clancy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Waleed Ali and I'm crashing into the show because I'm filling in for Daniel over the next few days, and also because I want to bring you some news. US President Donald Trump says negotiations with Iran are proceeding nicely, despite the US unleashing strikes in southern Iran in the middle of a ceasefire. American officials insist the strikes on missile launch sites and on boats placing mines were carried out in, quote, self-defence. Negotiations between the two countries are continuing in Doha, Trump saying earlier this week that a peace deal was close. And 19 Australian women and children linked to Islamic State have flown home from Syria, joining the rest of the contingent known as the ISIS Brides. But one woman and her child have been forced to stay in Damascus thanks to a temporary exclusion order which blocks her from returning for the next 2 years. The woman, believed to be Hudan Abdi, had the option of sending her 9-year-old daughter back without her, but opted not to. I'm Waleed Ali, thanks for listening to 7am, and I'll see you tomorrow.